Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to Generationally Speaking. Here at the table, we come and we discuss life issues, no matter what they might be. As we sit at the table with each generation, we all learn, we all grow, we all are inspired.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Generationally Speaking. I have with me my awesome co-host. I call him Spice, Pastor Shamika Latte Oliver, and she leads Women Who Lead Connects, an awesome organization. She's a mother of five, and I'm just fantastic. I'm just so um, excited about what the Lord is doing in her life. She's writing books and she's bringing women together to help them to write. And if you're interested in writing your story, hey, get in contact with her. Pastor Shamika, welcome.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here on today. I know it's going to be an amazing, amazing time with our guests. So let's do it. Let's go and let's generationally change the world.
Yes. All right. Minister James Durham is my other co-host. You know him as that cowboy fan. How in the world does a man who's born and raised in Washington, D.C. become a Dallas Cowboy fan? Well, that's who he is.
Well, Reverend, I said it once, I'll say it twice, and keep on saying it to the end of days. I refuse to be a victim of my environment, but always a pleasure to be here with you, Reverend.
All right, all right. Well, I'm excited to have our special guest today, Joshua Hunkin.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited. I invited him after viewing an Asian woman being assaulted on the streets of New York. And what bothered me, it was the assault was horrific. But when I saw three grown men looking on and saw what had happened to this woman, and there she lay in the street, they closed the door. I said, something wrong. And we've got to change the way we view each other. We have to change the way we interact and intersect with each other. We've got to learn that we are all God's children and we've got to come together. And one way of coming together and learning more about the Asian American community is through education. And I call my sisters and brothers a silent majority, a silent minority. I call them a silent minority because you know what? They put their heads down and they just, grind it out. They try not to make too much noise, but it is time for us to learn more about the Asian American community, our sisters and our brothers, to learn their history so we understand each other. If the only time we intersect with each other is when you go to the corner store and you see them behind the counter, then you might make the mistake of judging all Asian Americans in that same light. And by the same means, if the only time you see an African American is when they come into the store, then you might think that all African Americans act the same way. And so we've got to change that. And we change that by learning more about each other. We've heard a lot as African Americans that we all look alike. I mean, that's just asinine, but that's what people say. We all look alike. Can I tell you that my Asian American sisters and brothers, they get the same thing? Y'all all look alike. That's crazy. They do not all look alike. But that's what we hear. That's what we hear. And so today we want to get educated. And first of all, I want to talk about who comprises the Asian American community or the Asian designation. It includes Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipinos, Koreans, Asian Pacific Islanders. So it's more than just one group. And if you take the time, just like I asked you to take the time to look at African Americans, you will easily see they don't all look alike. Okay. So that's the first thing that we just need to just push out the door. And we want to take the time to learn more about each one of these cultures and each one of these designations. And so our special guest today is Joshua. So Joshua, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to our audience. Talk to us about your family, your designation. Talk to us about the expectations of from family when it comes to schooling and education, those kinds of things.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me. I think that I think my story is pretty similar to a lot of my friends. I think there's a really huge wave of Korean Americans immigrating to the United States in the 70s and the 80s, and that's when like the Korean War ended, and there's a huge depression, and then this war-torn country, they were fleeing to America for a lot of better opportunity and just a prosperity. So I know growing up, I'm actually a single child, but growing up, my parents also were small business owners. I know friends that had like beer and wine stores, convenience stores, but growing up in my entire life, my parents have a dry cleaners. So they had their shop open on every single Saturday. So they didn't want me to like grow up in the shop, which I'm pretty fortunate of, because I know a lot of friends that have parents that are small business owners. They're kind of forced into helping out in the store and like losing that part of their childhood. But I was really fortunate enough from third grade to about ninth grade, every single Saturday I spent at this Park family's house, Joshua Park, Justin Park, James Park. And I pretty like kind of grew up with the benefits of having brothers, because they beat me up, made me cry. They toughened me up because I was a mama's boy. I still am, but in a different way. But growing up with them really gave me the benefits of having all these brothers, but I guess not the long-term responsibilities, I guess. So, I think growing up, I would just spend time with them, and I would kind of see kind of a stark contrast between my parents that don't speak English at all. And not that the Park family isn't, first gen, or their family isn't first gen, but, they speak English pretty decently. So it's just interesting kind of like comparing my childhood to their childhood growing up. And I think that's really important to note on like East Asian culture, is that a lot of our nuances and expectations are kind of based on Confucianism. And this Confucianism is really, to really narrow it down or to really simplify it, it really just comes down to one person is a part of a larger community. So it's more like a collective versus very individualistic society. So I think growing up, that was a huge part in the way that we approach friendships, the way we approach family, the way that we approached even church, for example. I think that you can see how that Confucianism, that reverence for your elders really trickled down into how we interact with people. So I know that like my expectations growing up, I think almost to a fault, I think that a lot of maybe first generation Korean Americans, and especially the Asian Americans, there wasn't really such a huge emphasis on being like an entrepreneur or making your own business, because it's almost like, we came to this country working so hard, and we struggled as entrepreneurs and small business owners. So we want you to have a stable paycheck, a 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it kind of goes back to put your head down, just listen, just follow directions, don't cause a ruckus, don't take risks, because coming from such a poor country, war torn, they come to America and all they want is their children to have a cushy, safe, white picket fence jobs. And I feel like those are like the expectations that kind of stemmed from childhood and still kind of trickle over to today. Because even when I was going to school, it'd be really just listen to your teachers, follow directions, and just that Confucianism idea of really listening to your elders and just having that respect was really ingrained at a young age. So, yeah.
So when it came to schooling,
Mhm.
what was the drive there with how did you manage, or did you manage to make good grades? And what was the expectation from your parents and with them not being English speakers, how, I mean, who told them, how did they figure out that you're doing good in school or you're not doing good in
Yeah,
school?
yeah. Well, I know that actually I wasn't a great student in middle school and high school, the first half of high school, just because, my parents are divorced now, but they've really grown a lot. So I'm really glad that they've really had some character growth through that divorce. But growing up, they went through a divorce, and I took it pretty tough. But overall, though, I think that I just feel like, yeah, I think from maybe the first 6 years of secondary school, I wasn't a great student. But once I hit about 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, I really start to maybe take onus upon myself to really realize that, hey, you know what? I know my parents are working really hard to put food on the table. They didn't really have that toxic mentality of you have to get straight A's.
Mhm.
A B is failure. I think that in high school, freshman, sophomore year, my GPA was about like 3.2. But then junior year, when I was doing college applications, I really, like picked up my bootstraps, despite everything going on at home. And I got a 3.8 GPA both semesters. And that really kind of showed colleges that I was really on an upward trend. So I think that my kind of upbringing is similar, but also different to a lot of my Asian friends, because a ton of my Asian friends, they had such crazy pressure that, like, if you do not get an A, you get like a whooping at home, or you would just be, you'd be made fun of at the dinner table, or, you go to family gatherings, and it's really, I can understand it now that I'm older, what the previous generation came from. But I do know that the expectations for me for school were just, work hard, work diligently, listen to your teacher. But on the flip side, I know several Asian friends where it was either A or failure. So it was very, very, very cutthroat. So,
So you talked a little bit about, your parents working and you're
mhm.
spending time at the park house. So at their house, what was it like? Did you all, are you able to watch TV? Is there expectation of reading? I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that, I spend every Saturday there, but it's crazy. We were making a joke a while ago that in the summertime you would think that it's like summer vacation, but for us, like, it's crazy. In elementary school, my mom sent me to reading camp. Literally for 4 hours a day, I just sat there doing reading comprehension for books. That was my idea of a summer. Or I had like music camp, and Josh Park went to like math camp, and there was no this idea of like having fun and going to these camps. And I know back in the day, Joshua Park, Matthew, and we went to like this American summer camp called like 2 best weeks of summer. And we just like turned up, we were like doing arts and crafts, and we were doing archery and playing basketball. And like, it's like, is this what we're missing out on? It's crazy. It's like VPS, but more fun for about like 2.5 weeks. So, that was like a very stark contrast to like this emphasis on like instruments, for example. Like a great like anecdote of my childhood. I played piano since the age 5, and I quit when I was 12. And my mom plays piano, and I love her to death, but she's like an Asian tiger mom. And because she plays herself, every day during practice, she would have a wooden spatula in her hand, and every wrong note she would smack my knuckles. And then I guess at a certain point, because I think that she kind of had that striving for excellence. So I feel like maybe I can relate to my Asian friends that way. But I guess I kind of hit puberty. I was wanted to have some autonomy. So it was like a big shouting match, and I told my mom that I was done, and I was crying, and that was the end of my 7-year piano career. So,
Can I ask a quick question, Reverend?
please.
Because I hear a lot of discipline being instilled. Can you speak
Yeah.
specifically to the discipline that was taught, or part of your household coming up, and things that you were just taught?
No, yeah, that's a great question. I think that like respect kind of goes hand in hand with discipline. I know that I don't know what kind of punishment techniques my grandma went through, but when she was living with us, if I didn't follow directions, she would actually grab a handful of rice, throw it in the corner, and make me kneel on it. So, like, like once you kneel on grains of rice and raise your hands for about 30 minutes, you'll get discipline, in some respect. But I also did 5 years of Taekwondo, the Korean martial art, and that really taught me a lot of like discipline. I think that kind of going back to this like Confucianist idea, I think that there's, I think the Confucianist like ideology kind of less emphasize like what I feel like doing, what I want to do, and rather just doing what I should be doing. And I feel like that's kind of what similar like discipline is. I feel like you have motivation, like motivation to eat well, motivation to go to the gym, motivation to work hard. But motivation is only so temporary. Once you have discipline, that's when it overrides this feeling of I don't want to do something and I will do something. So I think that growing up, there was this kind of subtle implementation of even if you don't want to do it, you have to do it. So I think that in a negative way, growing up in an Asian household, particularly Korean household, there wasn't much discussions on emotions. My father was never really a emotive man, even though he is now. But I think that a lot of my Korean friends and peers can relate when they say that the Korean household was not a place of talking about your emotions. One of my really good friends, Caroline, she made this funny joke that whenever we had a conflict in our household, everyone would go to the rooms and figure it out by themselves. So crazy, right? There was no positive reinforcement. It was just do it because I told you so, do it because you're supposed to. And it's like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. So kind of similar to maybe some of my American peers that, what it's like in the conservative American South. I feel like speaking with some of our friends that are from the South or some of our friends are like Caribbean, we kind of have that commonality in how when we think of our fathers, they weren't like emotive figures. It was just like this stern man that I love and respect. And that's kind of flashes out to how we view God. We don't view God as this nurturing person, even though we should. We kind of forget that sovereignty, that justice is all backed by his love for his children. So, growing up and now becoming an adult, I kind of had to figure that out on my own and kind of do some more research and understanding that, my father does this and he is stern. He does this justice because he loves me. And on an even grander eternal theme, our God is a just God, but that justice, that sovereignty is backed by his love. So it's kind of juggling those two ideologies was very interesting growing up. So that's my long-winded answer on discipline. I think that it was, growing up, it wasn't a matter of like, I don't want to do it. It's more like I have to do it because I'm told to do so. And that's the way my parents were raised. And that's how they live their life, which is the reason why I know we'll talk about it later in the show today, but that's why, mental illness and depression is really so. I'm glad now that there's like they're kind of breaking the stigma, but growing up, there really was no conversation on that.
Mhm.
But like my friend Izzy, he's Thai, and he was telling me that in the Thai language, there's no word for depression. It's literally just insanity. Can you imagine growing up in a society where, the only word for depression is insanity? So it just goes to show that, if you're too much harping on discipline, like a lot of the Asian households, you really kind of ignore emotions. And that's a kind of a scary world to be in.
I mean, I like what, I apologize. I like what you said, though. I think there's a commonality between, like you said, Thai and or Asian or African Americans, because we didn't use the word depression or anxiety either. It was just like, you don't have time to be depressed. You don't have time to have a problem. You have to win in life. Life is hard. You have to win. You have to go get up, cry, but shut up in just a few and keep going. So I think it's something that's unsaid. And I'm glad for this conversation that we're having right now to let us know that we all bleed the same.
Yeah.
To let everybody know.
Look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, we all bleed the same. We all serve we all serve God. We all
Mhm.
serve the same God, I feel. We might
Absolutely.
see him a little differently or whatever, but I too was at a place. He just even had a revelation last year with the Lord asking me, how do you see me?
Mhm.
And it hurted me because I was like, I see you as a disciplinarian. So I felt like me serving God was like, I better do this because I don't want to go to hell. Or I better do this because
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
do want to go to heaven. But then I realized I view God how my household was.
Exactly.
My
Yeah.
mom was very strict, very controlling, and I didn't realize that I was kind of comparing the two or living the two until later on. Like you said, you learn when you open your eyes up, when you learn God for yourself, when you really deal with him on world issues, and you get that one-on-one time with him, and you're just like, oh, you're sovereign, you're loving, I'm really your child. It doesn't have to, you don't take a whip and beat me or take certain things, but you teach me.
Mhm.
You love me with grace. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this. And even with that saying, I wanted to ask you this question for wanting your family, um, the part of that comes to success. Was it because they feared something? Because I'm thinking even about myself. We want our people or our daughters or our sons to be successful. I believe that it was rooted in fear. Just fear of not getting to the next level, fear of not making enough, fear of that you're going to struggle, fear of that you got to hold up the family name.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that if I look back in my childhood and even to this day, I don't think that um I guess I don't think fear played a large part in my parents wanting me to be successful. I think that my dad is a very simple man, whereas my mom has a very complex history. But I know we'll talk about it later in the show, but just to give a very um diluted version of my mom's story, pretty much she came to America, left her job to study fashion at, I think it was NYU or one of the schools up there, for fashion. And after a year, she put a bunch of this money that she saved up to get her student visa. But what ended up happening was this person like stole her money, and her visa was expiring. And then she left her Korean comfortable lifestyle to this American dream. And that was all kind of shattered because she got kind of schemed out of her money on her visa. And she was about to be sent back home, but she met my dad through church, and that's how they got married. But I say all that because my mom and my dad really wanted me to be successful, not out of fear that I'm not going to make it in life, but rather kind of like living vicariously through their children. Because the opportunities that we have in this country are vast, and the opportunities that we have, my generation is nothing like the life that my parents lived. I know that my dad, even though he lived in the city, they were very, very poor. I remember at one point, he said that him and his brother like lived in the woods just to get away from that, just to get away from home. It's just really sad, like listening and hearing about my parents' story, how much they suffered during that post-Korean War Korea. But overall, though, I think that uh, maybe if I really look deep back in, maybe there is like a fear of not wanting to disappoint my parents. I think that you probably hear the word like Asian guilt be thrown around pretty often, and there is a sense of guiltiness that if I don't do this, I won't make my parents proud. I have to do right by my parents, and that's the reason why I have to work hard and do all this. So I think that rather than fear, it's almost like that funny saying like uh, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. It's almost like I don't fear the disappointment portion. I mean, I just fear the disappointment portion of letting my parents down and knowing how hard they worked, how much they really struggled, especially during the recession, just to put food on the table, and just like keeping that in mind when I'm not doing well. If that makes sense. So
Minister
that
Durham, you
answers
had
your
a question?
question.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight like one of the reasons we're having this conversation is the narrative is that Asians, African Americans are so different and we don't know each other, don't understand each other. But really the barrier is just how we look, and we look different. And at least in America, we tend to commune with the people who look like us.
Absolutely, yeah.
We didn't have to get far into the conversation to hear so many similarities.
Yeah.
Culture and yours, to start with the physical discipline. You know, you said the wooden spatula, the creative ways to discipline your child or rice and make it feel. I've been through so many different creative things. I don't want to say because the police might go and get my parents for retroactively to get them in trouble for what they did to me. But it's so many similarities, and I think that is just so amazing that we just need to get beyond what we see physically so we can connect. So just like you and many people who you know grew up, many of our parents in our community did not have an emotional connection and did not teach their children how to master their emotions and even how to interact and just understand their emotions, and probably because they weren't taught themselves. So just like you said, you had to figure it out on your own. We had to go in a room and figure it out on our own. And many of us, we really don't start to figure out until we grow up, we become an adult, and we get into a marriage, and then the issues come out that way. And figure it out. Like depression. Depression is a word in English language, but in our culture, depression was not a word. It was you put yourself together. You know, it's not even time for prayers. For tears. I can't even say how many times, you know, I've heard, you know, ain't nobody got time for tears, or you better not cry. You'll get beat and say, you better not cry. I'm going to give you some physical pain, but you better not cry. This physical pain I'm giving you. But the point I just want to make is that our story is so similar. You know, our likewise went through a tough time from Jim Crow, coming out of Jim Crow, and struggled, and they did the best they could to provide financially, to provide, you know, food and shelter for their kids, and they want the best for them growing up. And so they would instill certain lessons, and that's what that discipline was all about, so that you can have better and do better when you get older. And we share that same background, that same story, and it's just amazing to me. It's just, we just have to, I forget the book, Just Walk Across the Room. We just have to start just walking across the room to someone we see, no matter who we see, make eye contact, and then connect with them on a human level.
Absolutely.
That's so good. That's so good, because I was sitting here just listening. I know I'm just like, yes, you know, for this conversation, because it made me feel a sense of love, you know, just even more, because we don't get to have these conversations, you know, like this. And I was just like, man, I just felt God's love, like, wow. It made me even want to just do something more. Like, come on, we need this conversation just more, so that we can let everybody else know we understand. Sometimes I think that's what it is, that somebody just want to, do you understand? Because I feel as African American, you know, growing up, we only get hearsay.